Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is David Wachs to talk about thanking donors and expressing gratitude to donors. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on, Alex. It's a true pleasure to be on.
So for listeners who are hearing you for the very first time, could you explain a bit about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So I'm David Wachs, CEO and founder of Handwritten. Handwritten is the largest provider of automated handwritten note systems services in the world. So we have an army of 175 robots. Those robots hold real pens, and then they write out notes at scale for our clients. And our clients include major nonprofits, smaller cause-based organizations, as well as retail brands, real estate agents, kind of the entire gamut. But our whole purpose is to help our clients reach out in meaningful, impactful ways, and especially with messages of thanks. Really sending thanks is kind of core to what we do here at Handwritten.
Yeah, there's a lot of tech stuff I want to get into with you. But before we get into some of the details, let's talk about more higher level concepts, and then we'll work our way down to those details. So I was curious to know, at a principle level, why is it so important, do you think, to even thank donors? I know some organizations try to, some don't. Do you have any kind of inkling, or what's your perspective on just how important it is to thank donors for their donations?
Oh, 100%. So there was actually an impact survey, an organization called Impact, that did a survey of redonation rates. And what they found was, on average, most cause-based organizations have a redonation rate sub 50%. So less than 1 in 2 donors will redonate. And, when we're talking about donor acquisition costs, it's obviously much better to have a donor redonate than have to go out and find a new donor to do that, right? And it also says something about the cause. Like, if you're providing the correct communication to the donor, why wouldn't they redonate? When these donors were asked why they didn't redonate, the number one reason is they don't feel thanked. So why don't they feel thanked? Well, the easiest one could be they weren't thanked, which would be kind of rough. But if the nonprofit doesn't have the time or the resources to thank these donors, then that could happen. Or they could have been thanked, but it didn't feel meaningful to the donor. So what do I mean there? Maybe they got a text message or an email saying, thank you for your donation. And maybe that didn't kind of strike the I've been, gratitude vibe of the donor, right? The third thing could be they were thanked and they don't know. So maybe you sent them a typewritten letter or an email that never got opened because the donor confused it with spam or junk mail or a donation envelope in the case of print. So again, you thank them, but they don't know they were thanked, so your donation rate is low. But what we try to do is we try to use handwritten notes, because handwritten notes have a very, very high open rate. It's almost 100%. It's about 3 times greater than print. And then the response rate off handwritten notes is 27 times greater than print in our findings. So, yes, donors feel thanked because they open it, they read it, oftentimes they keep it, and then it does drive interaction and redonation with these nonprofits.
I'm old enough to remember that back in the day, I would send letters to people, actual mail letters, and then, emails started trickling in, and it was a pleasure to get email. Fast forward to 2023, and it's the exact opposite, where everybody's just inundated by how many emails they get. And to get a handwritten letter is something that's very precious and special now, because we understand how much time it took to do it, and usually it's very personal.
Not only time, but focus. Before we were getting on this podcast here, you heard me shuffling about trying to build some focus, and focus is so hard, and we're so distracted. And sending a handwritten note shows a dedication to, you're 100% right, time and focus and thoughtfulness, because you've taken the time out to try to, spend time for 2 minutes or 5 minutes thinking specifically about a certain donor and thanking them. Now, handwritten, when I talk about handwritten notes, broadly, I'm talking about the benefit of all handwritten notes, handwritten with an I. Our service helps you automate that and I could talk about the nuances there. But overall, I'm on this show to really preach sending handwritten notes of any variety, because it shows a deeper investment in time and gratitude than really any other form of communication. My background, just to kind of provide you a reason, my why, is prior to doing Handwritten, I actually ran a text messaging company. So I was part of the problem. I'd send millions of text messages a day on behalf of some of the world's largest brands like Abercrombie and Fitch, Toys R Us, Sam's Club, Office Max, Auto Trader, some of these very large brands. And what I realized was I was part of the problem. We were helping generate the distraction economy, when what we really need to do is provide a method to really create value, lasting communication. And that's what we're trying to do now.
So if handwritten notes you think are the best choice, I mean, let's just talk about the other options available to a nonprofit, right? You got email, SMS, postcards, I guess could be one option. Are there anything else that you can think of just in terms of what is available as an option, even though they're not maybe as effective?
Oh, yeah. So on our website, handwrytten.com, handwrytten.com, there's actually, if you go to the resources tab, there's the consumer outreach survey. And I know it doesn't say donor outreach survey, but it says consumers, and all donors are consumers. So it still applies. And we surveyed 2,000 donors blindly. So they didn't know we were with Handwritten. We just reached out to 2,000 random people. And what we found is phone calls are considered the most personal form of communication. The second most personal form of communication is handwritten notes, and then you have email, text, and print mail, which is at the bottom. Now, while phone calls are considered the most personal, when we asked the follow-up question, what's the most annoying form of communication? Phone calls were also the most annoying.
That's funny.
And handwritten note, well, if you think about it, phone calls are on your schedule, not the recipient's schedule, right? Like you
Right.
get on the phone when it's convenient for you, not when it's convenient for the recipient. So oftentimes you hit them when it's not convenient for them, and then it can be mistaken as telemarketing or something else. Handwritten notes have the least risk of being considered annoying. So if you're trying to run that, kind of walk that line of highly personal yet not annoying, handwritten notes really do a great job of that. So yeah, I mean, I would say you have calls, texts, emails, handwritten notes, and then print mail. And then you could also obviously add social direct messaging in there too.
The thing about phone calls as well is I imagine a lot of people these days are not used to answering their phones anymore, which is funny, but we have phones, we don't even answer them. Everybody's on their social media or direct message kind of apps.
That's right.
So
yeah.
We're not even just used to the idea of receiving a phone call as much anymore, especially if it's not from a number we recognize, like a bank that we already work with or some other organization.
Right. Yep. That's 100% right. I mean, you can turn your phone off to be silent for unknown phone numbers, which I think we're all doing now due to the being inundated by spam calls, at least here in the United States.
So for smaller organizations, you mentioned manually handwriting notes is a good option. But obviously, when you get to a certain size, when you have a certain number of donations or thank yous to get sent out, doesn't become feasible anymore. So either that they could outsource that or go with a more automated approach. So I'm curious to know, like, what was the moment where you said this is something where you decided that starting a company that use robots basically to mimic handwriting? When did that idea come into your mind?
Yeah. So, I tell the story so often, I don't even know if it's true anymore. It could be a figment of my imagination. But so the truth is when I sold my last company, I was looking for a new path. And I thought handwritten notes would be the way to go, because when I walk into people's offices, including my own, if you receive a handwritten note, not only is it open and read, but it's put on display. It's on the, back shelf of your office, or it's tacked to your refrigerator, whatever it might be. So I thought that might be really something to go after. And then when I, was kind of completing the sale of my last company, I also sat down to write handwritten notes, and quickly my hand cramped and I ran out of stamps and I didn't have enough stationery, and I'd screw up a note and I'd have to rewrite it. I can't call it a typo because it wasn't typed. But, I wanted to send handwritten notes to all my customers and my employees. So that took extra long because I'm a distracted, person with a lot going on. And I thought there had to be a better way. And that's kind of why I started this. That's kind of it. And then, the question is, how do you make it look authentic? And that's been a 9-year project. We're in year 9 now. And we do that a number of ways, which I can get into. But, our goal is to make it the most authentic form of communication beyond sitting down and writing it yourself, which is always going to be better.
And I really want to get into some of those details, because we talked in pre-show talking about how there's variations to letters.
Oh, yeah.
How even the line is not straight, how the left margin is not straight. So just to make sure, though, before we get into some of those details, I'm imagining the robot itself. So I can imagine like a plotter where you have this piece of paper on the table. The machine is holding the pen above it, and it's just basically kind of plotting with the pen on the paper. Would that, and then I don't know how the paper would or the postcard would move from postcard to postcard. If you could just give me the visual element of how that looks.
So our solution, and we actually have it patented, is there's a big paper feed. So when we so I came up with this idea. It didn't exist yet, but by the time I could do it, I was in a 2-year lockup with with the prior company. I sold that. I had to work for the new owners for 2 years. So in that 2 years, a company called Bond came out, and Bond beat us to the punch. And they were, it's interesting. Like, once it's kind of in the ether, other companies come up with it too. So they came out with basically what was a 3D printer, but they replaced what's called the hot end, the part that squirts the plastic on the platen. They replaced that with a pen. The problem with that approach is, well, there's a lot of problems with that approach, but I'm not going to get into inertial mass or anything like that. But the number one problem with that approach is there's no paper feed. So when we built our robot, most of our technology, believe it or not, goes into reliable paper feeding and paper handling. So by that, I mean ensuring the right note goes in the right, gets written on with the right message and goes into the right envelope. But in a nutshell, it's a big paper feed that we've developed. That paper feed then feeds onto a conveyor belt, and that the note or the envelope is then held down with some rollers. The pen comes out like a plotter and writes as much as it can around those rollers, and then the note slides down a little bit, so the rollers are in a different location, and it fills in the gaps of anywhere it missed. So we kind of keep track of the geometry of the note and how far we slid it down, so that we could slide down the writing that same amount to fill in the gaps. But that's basically how it works. And then it slides off the conveyor belt. There's other stuff that goes into it. Now we use computer vision systems to ensure that the note did write the way it was supposed to write. And if it didn't, it goes to a reject pile, and it gets rewritten. And if it did, it goes on. But that's the system in a nutshell. Unlike a traditional plotter uses a big spool of paper. And now I know why, because handling little pieces of paper is kind of a pain in the neck. But that's what we do. Is the paper gets fed onto a conveyor belt. It slides, rolls down the conveyor belt, gets written on, rolls down a little bit more, gets filled in, and then rolls off the conveyor belt.
That's super cool. And approximately how fast does this thing go now? How many notes can you write per hour or per minute?
It used to be 5 minutes per note. Now it's down to about 10. It's about 2 minutes per note. Mm-hmm. So it's about I'd say 2 to 3 minutes per note, because we've sped out that writing arm. So, it's still 30, at most 30 notes an hour per robot. It's rather slow, which is why we need 175 robots to scale and turn around large orders on behalf of our clients.
So let's talk about then the variability, because that was one of my first things is that,
Yeah.
robots are perfect. They write perfectly. They write straight. They write the letter T the same way every single time. So if you could talk to me about how you introduce that level of variability so it looks more authentic, more handwritten by a human.
Yeah, absolutely. So since the very beginning, we've developed our own system that leverages the best of font technologies. So we leverage what everybody else before us has done. So there's something called OpenType. It's a font standard and in that font standard, it includes randomization of quasi-randomization of characters. So we can, when we develop a font for somebody, a handwriting style, and we've got executives, celebrities, and just people that think they need their handwriting replicated, we take about 6 copies of each letter, and we ensure that it's randomized throughout the note. So when you look at 2 lowercase a's, hopefully 2 lowercase a's don't look the same throughout the document. Capital letters, the same thing. We also look at ligature combinations. So if you write 2 O's separately in the document, it'll look differently than 2 O's together, because perhaps you connect those 2 O's together with a loop connector. Or 2 T's. Do you cross 2 T's with 1 crossbar or 2? So we take into account all that in generating the handwriting. The thing with our system, though, is if you were to take a pen and write out a handwriting style like that in OpenType font, it would create bubble letters, because by definition, fonts are outlines. So if it were to write that, it would generate the outline of each character and it would look like a bunch of bubble text. So on top of leveraging OpenType technology, we also have our own system, our own proprietary system for doing centerline strokes of each of those characters. So that's kind of our secret sauce. And that allows us to leverage OpenType technology, but scale it in a way that works with our handwriting robots. On top of all of that, we vary the left margin so that there's not a hard edge down the page. We also vary the spacing between lines, so it doesn't look like you wrote on lined paper and somehow made the lines disappear. And then also, we now warp the text slightly so it bends up and down ever so slightly to create a really organic look that looks like you tried very hard to write on a straight line, but you failed to do that. So those are kind of the 3 forms of randomization that we do in the note, in addition to randomizing each and every character and creating ligature combinations to kind of improve the look and feel of the writing.
What about signatures? Are you able to reproduce someone's signature, or is it also done by machine just by using an open font?
Yeah, so signatures are unique. So signatures we consider a doodle, and we do those. It's actually very cost effective. And then we replicate your signature exactly and include it on your notes. I mean, we just had a very, very, very famous celebrity that had us do their signature with their little hearts and all that stuff in it. Or we have one of the founders of Facebook, and we have this peace sign that he includes, not a founder, an early employee in Facebook. And, he includes his peace sign in all his signatures. So they look phenomenal. And yes, we can do that very cost effectively, add your signature, because there it's really just tracing one thing, not building up a whole font from scratch. So yeah, we do it all the time. We've got thousands.
You mentioned that you also service everyone in the world, or at least you're the largest in the world. So I'm curious to know then, how do you support multi-languages, especially characters that are not so Latin-based?
Yeah, so I mean, we can handle English, Spanish, French, Greek, do the Greek characters, Cyrillic. What we cannot do, Asian character sets, because oftentimes what is printed or typed in a kanji character set is very different than what you would write, because there's this notion of reduced character sets. So, there's millions or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of characters in Mandarin, but the computer, to my knowledge, does not replicate all of that. So, it uses what's a reduced character set to do that. So if for us to replicate printed characters in handwritten form would be awkward and weird to the viewer. It would just not jive with what they're used to seeing. So we steer clear of that. But pretty much any English, German, Latin character set we can do. I mean, we've got all the umlauts and accent aigus and all that in our system, along with smiley faces, frowns, and hearts.
That's really cool. And then I'm curious because, of course, being a Salesforce guy in the CRM world, it's all about integrations and being able to easily enough export or import or connect, let's say, a Salesforce or any other CRM to your system to say, here are all the donors we need to thank, rather than having to export some kind of file, especially if there's images, and then email them to you or Dropbox them to you. How does the integrations work, basically? Or do you have any integrations with any other CRMs or any other systems that you use often?
Yeah, so great question. We, in addition to being the biggest provider of this service in the world, to my knowledge, we also have the most integrations. So the most frequently used is Zapier, which is kind of a point and click way of integrating with a number of platforms. On top of that, we also integrate with Make. And for those quasi computer nerds out there, I highly recommend you look into Make. It's like Zapier on steroids and lets you do all sorts of stuff. On top of that, we've been in the Salesforce App Exchange since 2017. We actually removed our app from the App Exchange yesterday because we don't want to create confusion. We are releasing a new version of the app, completely rebuilt from the ground up. I mean, you can imagine that something from 2017 is a little long in the tooth. So we have a new version of the app that's supposed to be approved any day now. So we're waiting for that to occur. After this podcast recording, I'm going to get back and put in another ticket to Salesforce. But the deal with that app is it's full integration into Salesforce, where everything you can do besides creating your own card. So you'd have to go to handwrytten.com, design a card. So if you want to put a photo of your cause on one side and a logo on the back and go crazy that way, you can do that. And then you go into the Salesforce app, and when you go to browse for our cards within Salesforce, that card is then there. You can take that card, write on it in a one-off fashion. So pick a contact, pull in their address information, write out a card, hit send to mail it, perhaps include a gift card or your business card or some other custom insert, and then send it. And then that activity gets recorded back to the activity timeline within Salesforce. We can do the same thing on a bulk level. So you can go to a search list view, if I'm using that language correctly, select a whole bunch of contacts as long as they have addresses in the system. And then once you click all those, you can hit next, send a handwritten card to all of them, kind of template out your message using standard Salesforce merge fields, and then send those cards through Handwrytten. And then we integrate into flows and process builders. So you can generate a object, to get into the weeds, within Salesforce and connect that so that based on certain Salesforce events, send handwritten notes on a automated level. In addition to Salesforce, we do the same thing with HubSpot, Shopify. I know there are some causes that use Shopify and other online stores. For instance, we partner with One Tree Planted, which is a nonprofit that plants trees. And for every 100 cards we mail a month, we plant a tree through One Tree Planted. So it's better than recycling. We're replacing trees at a rate of 23 to 1. So for every one tree we go through, we plant 23 more. And the way we do that is we go to One Tree Planted's website. They have a Shopify store. We buy trees and that sort of thing. So we integrate with Shopify, where we can automate that experience too, with a really cool tool. And now we're proud to say that we integrate with Blackbaud. We've developed our own plugin for Blackbaud. Currently, it is private, meaning you'd have to reach out to us and we'd walk you through that install. But then from within Blackbaud, for those of you familiar with Blackbaud, you can do all the same types of things as I mentioned within the Salesforce plugin. So we are, our whole methodology is not to change your processes, but to automate your processes. So we don't want you to have to go to a new system to do stuff. We just want to put it on automatic so that we ensure compliance within your organization.
Yeah, and to break down a little bit or to simplify what you're saying, because you really did get into the weeds, which is awesome. But basically the underlying story is everything you mentioned about integration to Salesforce. It sounds like it's easy for the user to do. That's basically the premise, that despite the technical elements that are involved in it, it's really like point and click kind of thing. It's not like there has to be some technical guru that comes in here and spends days integrating. It seems to be quite fluid. So that's great.
Yeah. So what we do by default is we add buttons to the contact view, the account view, and the opportunity view within Salesforce. So if you go to look at your contacts in Salesforce, we can add a button there that says send handwritten note. When you click that button, you don't leave Salesforce, you stay in Salesforce, but then it says, okay, which card do you want to use? And it's got all your cards available, including any custom. You click a card and then you type your note and hit send, and then it records it back to Salesforce. So you're right. It's once it's set up, and the setup is rather simple, and we can walk you through it over a Zoom call, you would then be able to send handwritten notes directly within Salesforce. Again, we are currently waiting for Salesforce to approve our latest, greatest offering, which, our old one was a little cumbersome, but the new one is just phenomenal, and we're proud to share it with the world. Hopefully, by the time everybody listens to this.
This is more of the next question I have is more philosophical, but I think it's a conversation worth having, especially because I think you have a unique perspective on it, in that, AI is becoming more and more popular, and people are undecided on what it means for an AI to do something that either could have been built by a human, or maybe sometimes passes off to try to be a human. I don't know if there's like a moral or ethical element to it, but I'm curious to know, what is your perspective on having a machine do something that a human was? It's representing a human, but it's obviously not. Do you have like a little disclaimer saying, this was written by a robot, or is it? Because the experience is really about the donor, it's all about the focus of that, and how it was done, whether it was actually written by hand or not, is not really important. And it's just a way of helping organizations do this in scale. Like, I'm curious to know your perspective on the passing off a machine as a human element.
So what I will always joke and say is sending an actual handwritten note with an I, sitting down and doing it, is always the best bet. Using our service is, there's Hallmark has the slogan, when it's good enough to send the very best. I would say handwritten is when it's almost good enough to send the very best, because the very best is actually sitting down and writing a handwritten note. That said, if you're trying to do this at scale, what's better? Not doing it at all, because you can't, or doing it but leveraging a tool. In the States, every year, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people get the Christmas card from the President of the United States. How many people really think the president sat down and signed a Christmas card for them? That said, many of these people still put that Christmas card on display on their mantle or on their fridge, because it's a step more than nothing, right? It's a step more than sending a printed note or something else. Having something that looks authentic is still meaningful. With us, I would say most people, digital marketers and listeners to your podcast excluded, would never know that this note is written by a robot unless you hand it to them and you say, was this note written by a robot? Because when you do that, you're putting the note under additional scrutiny that no individual would ever do. Otherwise, they just say, gee, thanks so much for the thoughtful handwritten note. These days, in the age of generative adversarial networks, large language models, and all the rest. Emails you get. I had an employee that called out sick, and I read her note to me, and it wasn't a handwritten note, it was just an email. I read it and I was like, I think she used ChatGPT for this, So emails too aren't written by people. They're generated by robots. So what's the difference, right? It's the fact that you're going a few steps beyond to try to do something to set yourself apart. When everybody else zigs into digital, you zag into analog and try to set yourself apart that way. So, back in the 50s or 60s, pick an era. If you wrote in a complaint letter to the head of Air Canada or something, and you would then get a response with a signature or a handwritten note back, I would have to imagine the CEO of the organization didn't write that out or even sign it. They had their secretary do it, right? But it still means something for you because you got a response back or you got a thank you or whatever it is, even though the person that was supposed to write it didn't write it. So all we're doing is helping brands do this in a cost-effective way when pennies matter these days at scale, while also ensuring compliance, meaning the notes go out on time, they're not screwed up. If you hire a company to do this for you, maybe they have a disgruntled employee, or maybe the wrong note gets stuffed in the wrong envelope, or maybe they have terrible handwriting or greasy fingers and get grease all over that. What we can help do is provide a consistent experience for the end recipient, the donor, that seems 100% authentic while being low cost and reducing risk. So that's really what we're trying to do here. I don't know if that answered it.
It does, totally. Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm curious then, on the same vein, in terms of the AI experience, is there any in your plan, or do you currently use any kind of AI today, or will you plan to use it in the short term?
Yeah, great question. So we do. We use it already 3 different ways, and we're going to be extending that. So number 1 is the warping of text. So yes, we vary the line spacing, and we vary the left margin, and we vary the characters. That's all standard programming. The warping to make each line ever so slightly bent, we actually use some artificial intelligence to make that look authentic. The second way we use AI is in our app itself. Now, this is currently limited to our web app. So if you go to www.handwrytten.com and click sign up or sign in, you're then in our lovely user interface, and there you can send notes. And when you do that, and the biggest issue is, well, I don't know what to send. What do I say? So we've incorporated ChatGPT directly into our app. You can click the AI assist button or link next to the writing pane and type, write a donation letter to Mr. Lapa for his lovely donation of $500, which will go towards rebuilding schools in Africa. And then it'll write a lovely note for you. You just correct it, change it, whatever, and hit send, and then it'll write that out. So we use generative AI for the actual copy creation now. And then the third place we use AI is in the quality assurance. So we use machine vision systems to ensure the right card goes in the right envelope. We ensure the envelopes are written correctly, the card is written correctly, down to a single character being in the wrong spot or missing. So all of that is AI too. Going forward, just to give you a peek into the future, I've tasked my integration engineer to create an integration into ChatGPT. So what I mean by that is we use ChatGPT in Handwrytten, but why can't you use Handwrytten in ChatGPT? So right now, ChatGPT is opening up an ecosystem of third-party apps where you could say, pick me the best stocks for the day or whatever. Why couldn't you say within ChatGPT, write a letter to my Aunt Sally for, the lovely bouquet of flowers she sent, or write a letter to my neighbor for accidentally running over their dog or whatever it is. So then within ChatGPT, it would actually handle that for you, pick out a card and do all that. So that's kind of our next step. The reason being is, looking down the road 5 years, I imagine telling your Alexa on steroids to go write a note to your sister thanking her for your birthday gift. And then we would just handle that for you.
That does sound very convenient. Any other plans for the short-term future? Maybe something that does not involve AI, or is that really the focus for the next couple of years?
Well, we're always improving. Right now, it's all operational based. So we're improving the flow of getting the cards in the envelopes, always looking to tweak our handwriting generation. We're going to be opening up additional facilities throughout the world and then, continue our strategy of embracing and extending the best platform. So right now that's Blackbaud for nonprofits, but there's other platforms we've got in the works too. So if there's a nonprofit donor management system that any of your listeners would like us to get involved with, please let us know and we'll look into it for them.
So what is the best way that people can reach you then with these kinds of follow-up questions and comments?
Yeah, I'm David at handwrytten.com. So just like it sounds, David at, and then Handwritten is HANDWRYTTEN.com. I urge people to go to our website and click business and request a sample kit. We actually have a page. If you click business, you'll see market solutions, nonprofits, and you can read some of our latest writings on nonprofit and kind of what we do there and request a sample kit. When you get that sample kit, you can judge for yourself if it looks authentic or not. And, follow us on all the socials, LinkedIn and Facebook being our two biggest. But we're out there in all the social media platforms. Just search for Handwrytten with a Y.
Put all the links in the show notes below. David, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been great.
Thank you so much, Alex. Really appreciate your time and interest.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.